Whether you're looking to become the next master breeder and raise fish, or just want to keep happy and healthy fish, Grindle worms are an amazing live food. As a matter of fact, for small and medium fish, it's my favorite. Today I'm going to share with you why and show you how easy it is to keep your very own Grindle worm culture. First things first, here's what we're going to need. Just a regular old plastic container. As you can see here, doesn't have to be super big. As a matter of fact, this size is perfect for starting it. You can always, graduate to a bigger culture, and depth is not an issue. So, something shallow is okay. Next, what you'll need is some scrubby scouring pads. I get these from the dollar store. I love the dollar store for fish and cheap aquarium items, and that's where I pick these up. You're also going to need a little piece of plexiglass that kind of fits the shape of your container. You're going to need some polyfill or pillow stuffing. You're going to need some stale bread, and you're also going to need a starter Grindle worm culture. You can check out wildfishtanks.com to see if we have any in stock. Unlike micro worms or banana worms, which are really good for teeny tiny fry, I have a video on that in the description. Grindle worms are actually large enough for even full-size livebearers and tetras. They go crazy for them, as do cory cats, and they're actually great first foods for larger fish like cichlids. The best thing I like about them is how easy they are to maintain and how easy it is to feed with them. Today I have 2 cultures here, and I'm going to be setting up a third culture to show you how it's done. First, we want to prepare the new container. As you can see, I've popped a few holes in the lid. That is going to allow some air to get through, but we don't want any kind of mites or any kind of something to infect the culture. So that's where the polyfill comes in, and we're simply going to push the polyfill through these little holes. All right, now that our lid is set up, we want to prepare the actual container, and that is when I'll take a piece of the scouring pad. Usually they come in about this size. I think for $1 you get about 5 or 6. 5-pack was $1. So you can get them anywhere, but like I said, I recommend going to Dollar Tree, where everything is actually $1 here in the States. You want to cut it down to the size of about the container and simply just place it in the bottom. Now, in lieu of a starter culture, essentially I'm just going to open up one of my current cultures and use it as a starter culture. You can do this a bunch of different ways. As you can see, this is kind of an ongoing culture right now. There's a piece of plastic on top, and as you can see, there's tons of worms, and that's actually the food. And if we take up this piece of pad, you can see underneath there's worms down there. So there's worms all over this thing. For our quote-unquote starter culture, I'll simply just take this piece of acrylic and use it on the new culture, and then I can simply use the old piece or the new piece and place it back on the old culture, and now I've essentially, split my culture. When you guys get yours in the mail, depending on how they come, you just want to essentially add them on the bottom of the container or into this scouring pad. When you first start off, you might not notice many. That's okay. They will get cranking over a period of time, and I do have some tips and tricks, because once they get going, it's good, but there's some tricks on how to kind of get them started and keep them cranking. Essentially, I've got now this all set up. I want to add a little bit of moisture, and this is something that you'll learn. You want to keep it moist, but you don't want a bunch of actual liquid sloshing around in the bottom. So typically what I'll do is take a dropper. I prefer to use tank water. This is kind of my science experiment here in the front room, which is why I have my culture set up. I had a bunch of baby fry growing up. We're going to do a video on that. But essentially, I just take some tank water, and I will kind of wet down the pad. Once again, you don't need to soak it totally. We don't want tons of water sloshing around. The goal is just to keep this area nice and moist. You want to go ahead and make sure these pads don't come with some type of soap suds. I'm sure some of them probably get sold with some type of soap or something in them. So you want to make sure there's nothing like that. It's a good idea to rinse them out, wring them out first. That way that it's clean. Once you get that in there, and now it's a little moist, you got a little water in there, and you got your worms, it's time to add a little bit of food. And that's where your stale bread comes in. Now, big shout out to my local fish friend David, who has bred and raised tons of fish and keeps about a dozen different types of live food cultures. He's always tweaking things, and this whole method was actually from him. So big shout out to him. He's the one who turned me on to using these pads, and feeding with the stale bread. And you're only going to need a little bit. This is about a half of a slice. You're going to need like a minuscule amount, especially to start. I can't stress this enough. If you learn anything from this video, you have to start slow when feeding these guys. You have to kind of feed twice a day. I will take a little bit of the bread and kind of just sprinkle it onto the scouring pad, just a few pieces. The reason why stale bread works a little better is because you can kind of grind it up nice and fine and get it spread out. What you don't want is big chunks, and you don't want the food to go moldy. In the past, I've used kind of wet dog or cat food, and it tends to kind of mold, or if you use too much, it will mold. The goal is to put enough food so that you have to feed twice a day. Especially in the beginning, you want to feed in the morning or so, and then when you go to feed later on in the evening, there should be no food left. So there's no risk of it spoiling. The quickest way to spoil pretty much any culture is going to be to overfeed. Same thing with your fish tank. These guys will be fine. They're not going to die on you if you miss one of the feedings. Not ideal, but that's okay. It is better than overfeeding and getting moldy food in your culture. I cannot stress that enough. At the very beginning, for the first few days to a week, you may only notice a few worms. You may feed, even 3 times a day. If you can do it, that's fine. But the smaller the feedings, the better. Eventually, as you'll see, as my cultures, they're not the biggest booming cultures, but as you can see, once they start going, you could feed a little heavier. But once again, the worst thing you can do is overfeed your culture. That is going to lead to a crash. Similarly to the microworms, these guys are pretty self-sustainable, where you don't have to kind of totally change out the culture that often. Although I do recommend, even if your culture is going well, at least every few weeks, maybe every month, consider starting a fresh one or splitting it. Redundancy is always recommended. My friends and I spread the cultures around. That way, even if my multiple cultures crash, I have friends in the area with them. So I recommend you do the same. You can keep these right at room temperature, and they will reproduce fairly quickly. A few more pros and cons and things to watch out for. This culture should not smell or stink in any way. I mean, if you get your nose right up into it, it's not going to smell the prettiest perhaps, but you shouldn't be like opening the container and getting a whiff of something disgusting. If that is the case, your culture is spoiling or about to spoil. Also, these worms are very good size. I think they're very versatile. Whereas you could feed them to the larger, medium-sized fish or a few inches long, but also, baby fish will accept them. These rice fish have been chowing them down. As I mentioned earlier, the ease of actually feeding the Grindle worms is one of the reasons why I like these so much. You can take the piece of acrylic and, essentially without even getting your hands too dirty, I sometimes will just kind of, you dip portions of the acrylic into the water, and then the worms will literally fall off. And as you can see, these rice fish are starting to realize that there's some live food in the water. Alternatively, if you want to get your hands a little dirty, you can just kind of take your fingers and wipe the Grindle worms off and then stick them in the tank as well. Either way, it's very easy to actually feed these worms. I do recommend, you see a little pieces of bread there. I fed a little earlier. Normally, I would wait until there's no bread left and kind of feed the worms to the fish right before I go ahead and feed the actual worms. That way, that limits any pieces of stale bread that may go into the tank. But typically, just like the microworms and a little bit of mashed potatoes get into the tank, any tiny little bit of bread should be, a non-issue. If you've kept Grindle worms before, let me know in the comments down below how you've done it. Have you been successful? Have you tried this way before? I'm curious to know. Always looking to learn. I wish you the best of luck with your culture. To check out some more live food videos, click right there. Some breeding videos right there. As always, guys, stay positive and stay passionate.